Good morning. Thanks for joining me. Today we're looking at being an ROV pilot in the UK, working mainly in the North Sea off the northeast coast of Scotland, but occasionally in the Irish Sea in Cardigan Bay. How did I become an ROV pilot? It was a natural progression, really. Following the tech, I went offshore as a mechanical fitter, saw that what ROV pilots did, and just applied for positions. Eventually, one company was interested enough to sit me down and interview me. As a 40-year-old, they were quite pleased to see me. They were used to taking youngsters straight out of college with no engineering experience. So I guess they welcomed me with open arms. They offered me a salary which I was pleased with, but you always try for more. And it was explained to me that the role of pilot technician, of which I would be on the mechanical side, had various grades or stages. Pilot Tech 4, 3, 2 and 1. And above that you were in the realms of supervising roles. So I would be taken on as Pilot Tech 4 with an agreement that I could rise through the ranks as soon as I showed any real reason to give me a pay award. I trusted them at the word, and they were true to the word. Although the interview was one of the strangest ones I've ever had. And the chap, I won't mention him by name, but on subsequent phone calls he would ring me up at home and then say nothing. And he actually believed that if you were the first person to speak, you lost any argument. That was weird. The rest of the management team were fantastic. Supported me, enabled me, everything I needed. When I joined the company, I was given an ROV Pilot's Log Book. This is a thick book containing a diary of all your dives, dates, what you did. I guess it would be subject for scrutiny if there was any insurance work. It's got pages and pages of dates and times when you were flying the ROV. What does an ROV do? It's used to check subsea structures. That may be pipes on the seabed 140 metres down. It might be the legs of an oil rig. It might be a blowout preventer of a drilling rig. It might be watching from a distance a diver as he does his tasks. What does an ROV look like? Imagine something the size of a mini on a string. That string is an umbilical with 91 connectors. Conductors. Each one of those was necessary to control the vehicle during a flight. Yes, some were duplicated as a redundant type of technology. The ROV has thrusters on it, usually 6 or 8, mounted at the corners and centrally pointing up and down. This allows the ROV to fly through the water under the power of 50 horsepower motors hydraulically. This is where a mechanical pilot tech comes in, maintaining everything mechanical on the ROV, the winch, the crane. You were part of a team. A supervisor usually led the team, and then there'd be a pilot tech mechanical and a pilot tech electrical. Bear in mind that most of the pilot techs were youngsters. I did have to stand my corner. I did have to take on the role of a 40-year-old. Experience, common sense, not jumping in. I nearly said diving in there. That could have been misconstrued. So that covers what an ROV is, what an ROV pilot does. Well, let's delve a little deeper what an ROV pilot does. The ROV usually had a manipulator arm, 6 axes mounted on the front, and on the gripper of the arm we could mount various tools to do very simple tasks. So harken back to the days when I programmed industrial robots. It was pretty straightforward, this robot arm. It didn't hold many challenges. The ROV dive into quite deep waters on the North Sea would suffer considerable pressure changes in the system, and so there was a diaphragm on the system which allowed for oil to be let out of the system and then be returned to the system as you raised and lowered the ROV through the water column. Right, back to the control shack. There was 2 main seats in the shack. Old, brand new computers. Old nowadays, archaic nowadays, unbelievable nowadays. But in the late 80s and early 90s, this is what was used in a professional role offshore. Grab a strong drink, take a seat and wait for it. An Amstrad. I think it was called a 1512. Sometimes it would crash and we'd have to sit the ROV on the seabed and reboot the system. Imagine that. £500,000 worth of ROV switched off on the seabed. Would it power up? It did every time I was there, so I guess it was foolproof. Back to the sharp end of the control shack. You're working in almost darkness, just the light of the monitors of the screens in front of you. In our shacks, the pilot was on the left, the co-pilot on the right. 3 screens above us. 1 screen for the pilot to see what he was doing, which was a direct link to either the colour camera or the black and white camera mounted forwards on the ROV. The black and white was called the SIT camera, Silicon Intensified Target. It could almost see in the dark. It was a state-of-the-art camera for the 90s. The colour camera, I can't remember the resolution, but it just enabled us to see the rig or whatever we were working on as clear as we could. If you touched the seabed and disturbed any silt, it may take minutes for it to clear again. You didn't have GPS positioning in those days, but I guess it's there now because an ROV surrounded by silt that you've just disturbed, it's like looking through a sandstorm, and when it cleared, your position might not be as you suspect. How much forward thruster do you put on to maintain station? You certainly don't want to be banging into anything. We had lots of gadgets, you can imagine. Sonar we could switch on if we got really back beyond the view of the target we could switch the sonar on, find the target again, and move forward closely. If a member of the drill crew or the management on the rig asks us to do a certain task, we try and oblige. We would check things like for gas leaks on the seabed. Yes, there are gas bubbles that appear out of the seabed, and it's been known for complete oil rigs to sink because gas doesn't support steel. So if a gas bubble's large enough to encompass a rig and the rig's floating, it may well sink. So it is a serious issue, not so much in the North Sea where lots of rigs are piled or nailed to the seabed, but in places like South America where lots of jack-up rigs are used, there's been rigs just sink. So it is serious enough to monitor now and again. Other jobs we might do: watch the blowout preventer valve, a giant valve on the pipeline, the main valve which controls flow, and if you were to remove the rig from the pipeline, this valve would be closed, keeping the pressure in. So a very important part. The rig would have a template on the seabed with 24 or 36 tapered holes for the BOP to sit on and drill through. The oil rig would lower drill string down to the BOP. The BOP would be opened hydraulically from the rig floor, and we would watch subsequent operations. On the base of the rig there would be bullseyes. What's a bullseye? Imagine a hemisphere filled with oil, circles on it like a dartboard, and a massive metal ball that would freely move about. Obviously, if the rig was vertical, the ball would be central. If it moved to the side, you had an inclination of everything from the seabed upwards. You're aiming for perfection, but things move even on the seabed. So checking the bullseyes was like checking for accuracy on the rigs. So it was a necessary part of our task, and this is where attaching a brush to the manipulator arm was a simple task that when you went down to check a bullseye reading, the co-pilot Once the pilot had manoeuvred the ROV into position, the co-pilot could brush any silt off the bullseye, so you could take good clear video. Other things we could do, we could use the manipulator arm to turn valves very simply, very crudely, turn them on or off. All essential work that a human diver might have to do before ROV's intervention. So it was safer, no people were involved, it was quicker, we could drop the ROV in the water, fly down, fly to the valve, open it, film it, get the go-ahead from the drill floor, and then retrieve the ROV. So the pilot was flying the ROV, the co-pilot was operating the cameras and the manipulator arm, and it was a second pair of eyes to look on the sonar for any other targets. You would see all sorts on the seabed of the North Sea. I've seen scaffold poles in a heap. I've seen generators, full-size welding generators on wheels. All have fallen over the side of a rig during construction or operation. Did I like being a ROV pilot? Yes. Was there a quick ascent through the ranks? Certainly, if you showed promise. Was the environment challenging? Wow. The North Sea was certainly challenging. The weather stopped us from working, stopped the rig from working. I was on what they call a jack-up rig, which is a floating oil rig which moves about the North Sea, drilling. I was on a jack-up once and the weather was closing in. It was bursting windows of supply ships and rigs all around us. Now, a jack-up isn't just free floating. Imagine a leg at each corner with two chains at each corner, spread out to dig into the seabed of the North Sea and tension up. If the wind's blowing, I should also mention the jack-up rig can raise out of the water slightly, not completely. Don't get me wrong, we haven't got flying jack-ups. It would lift up from its working level to let waves pass underneath it rather than break over it. So when you've got a storm coming at you, a couple of your chains are taking the most load and the rest of the chains are quite slack. And then when the wave passes and the rig settles again, all the chains are taking equal load. This particular storm, and I can't find evidence of it. I'd love to. 90, 91, thereabouts, this storm was called 100-year storm. I'm sure it must have been reported in the Press and Journal at some point, but I've been unable to track it. It was memorable, and I really would like to track it and get that memory. That night we had no ROV work. There was nothing being done on the rig. It was all about survival. I went up to the main control deck and I stood alongside the crew as they watched the storm come towards us, powered up the rig so that it was taking on the force of the storm and then relaxing when it passed. Now this was all well and good during daylight hour. I guess it was a different kettle of fish during night time. We could hear that rigs had broken anchors, broken chains, and were moving into port. Supply ships had had cabin windows damaged, so they had to return to Aberdeen. And we were still out there, night after night, battling this storm. It was incredible. How big were the waves? You're going to think exaggeration plays a big part, but imagine a block of flats coming at you. That was the size of the waves for a couple of days and nights. So the environment was challenging. When the weather was suitable, it was still challenging entering and leaving the water with the ROV. As it goes through the splash zone, there's a risk of the ROV being dashed against the rig. So you don't mess about. You have a pilot, a co-pilot and a winchman, all working in unison to get the rig up out of the water and using the crane attached to the winch to lower it onto the deck of the rig. It was only when it was strapped down and checked over that you could relax. It isn't a normal 9 to 5 job. You have to do what's asked of the client, and clients can want you on, working and off without a break. Did I enjoy doing it? Yes. Was it formative in my engineering? Well, it gave me an insight. Certainly something to look back on. Working in the North Sea as an ROV pilot. That was a short snippet of my take on working. Thanks for watching. Join me again soon.